I'm used to this being my seat. This is where our seats.
Yeah.
Go on, Bill. Yeah, I see it. Oh.
Yeah.
I have to sneak out, so I'm staying on the end here. Well, I think we can leave at like 7:45.
Oh, so you, I'm down there with the committee, you're just, you guys.
So yeah, we're just, you're on the committee.
Yeah. It was a wedding, Colin's wedding.
Oh, wow, that's coming quick. Jeez.
Yeah, he's on my mic. That's 12 on.
Oh, you are? With Mason?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, good. Sounds like weather's gonna be good, thank you.
Oh, good.
Good, good, good.
Baby.
Yeah.
I don't do want to maybe just slide one over here.
You did.
Oh, yeah, another chair.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I'll just grab one here, Rich. You guys are the important ones. You got a chair that has.
That's good though. A lot of them don't let you do that. A lot of them make you pay just for time, and that's, you know, like, guess who's a seat? Which is why they also make people. Mr. Fredette, how are you? She's good. He's good. He's good.
Sure.
I was just talking about
Is
her.
it he or she?
It's a he, but I was just talking about her, so.
Not me. Years before, not now.
If it was before the spring, people would have 3 of them.
Already, right.
Guys, why don't you try and, if you, or, sit, oh, maybe at the top of the table there?
Over here, top.
This presentation is gonna be in that direction, so. You, hey, Heather?
I'll be making the presentation.
Okay.
Fres, do you want to sit here and I'll move over here?
I won't displace you.
I don't mind. I'll just make Lou move. No, I know, but for the presentation, he's got to, you know, for the discussion, we can go down there afterwards.
All right, it is 6:30, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. For those of you who don't know me, I am Mike Henrik, I'm the chairman of the planning committee. As you can see, we've got a bunch of new faces at the table. The main reason why we expanded the group is our open intent over the next couple weeks, couple months, whatever it's gonna take, is to define how we're gonna implement the redistricting. Just so we start out, so everybody's on the same page, we are redistricting, okay? That's not a part of the discussion tonight, will we, should we, whatever it is, that decision's been made, we are redistricting. The other known factor is we have selected scenario 1, and that's the way we're gonna go about it. What we're hoping to do is to look at the details on how we implement that, and all discussions are open. We wanted to invite some of you folks who are staff whose schools will be heavily involved with some of the moves, because your input is important to us. So, but if we can all start from the premise, yes, we are redistricting, yes, we are doing scenario one, now let's figure out the best way to get it done. And again, your schools are impacted probably the most, some of you at least, and so your input was very important to us. So, but if we could go around the table and just make some quick introductions.
Hi everybody, I'm Pat Gallagher with MP Planning Group. We were the consultant that assisted the district with the redistricting process.
And Peter Carroll.
Noah Marini, the principal at Wilcox.
Carla Armstead, the principal at Stratford.
Eric Conrad, principal of Stratford Academy, Johnson.
Greg Regis, principal of Flood Middle School.
Bryce Baum.
Rich Fredette.
Alan Welling.
Jill D'Angelo Powers, board member.
Jack Betty, I'm assistant principal, Stratford High School.
Bill O'Brien, board member.
Mike Henrik, board member, chairman. And just FYI, Alan is also a council member and was very involved in the Stratford High rebuild, or build, it's not a rebuild.
This is starting to fade into the sunset a little bit at this point.
He is, but he was a planning member before he got onto the council, but I wanted to keep him on the planning just because of his knowledge and having that interaction between both the board and the council or the town side, the mayor's office. I thought was important, and he's got a lot of information, a lot of knowledge. I think it was important as well. So, how about you? Oh, and so I wanted to bring something back so they could go through the numbers for everybody here, so you guys can kind of see, instead of going back through all the different things and the reasoning why we did what we did, but you can just see the numbers that kind of led us to this point, and I just thought it would be a good starting point for the discussion.
All right, thanks everybody for having me. So I just want to start tonight by going very high level over our process. So we had the planning committee establish our criteria as we delved into this redistricting process. And really the primary objective was to better balance enrollment between facilities, with the elementary schools being our primary focus, but also being cognizant of the middle and high school feeder patterns as the elementary schools feed into them, opportunities to better even enrollment between those facilities is important as well. And then we also wanted to be aware of racial balance, knowing that there is a state law that we wanted to maintain compliance with, and also trying to maintain just a semblance of balance between the different neighborhoods, even beyond the state requirements. So moving into our rationale, we started our process with enrollment projections and a capacity and utilization study. And what that allowed us to do is forecast enrollments for the next 10 years and then compare projected enrollments with the size of each of the buildings. And we did the capacity study for both the elementary and the middle school buildings. So some of our key findings is that the chapel attendance zone is undersized, and so that building has the lowest utilization of all of the elementary schools. And on the other hand, Johnson House, the attendance zone is too large for that school's capacity. And so to deal with that imbalance, the district has had to do a large number of administrative placements for students residing in Johnson House that get placed in other schools across the district. Another key finding is that Lordship is too small to function as a true 2-section per grade K-6 school, which means that we have to maintain an attendance zone as well as policy in order to fill out that school in a flexible manner, knowing that the attendance zone has to essentially allow the school to have some students from the neighborhood, but then the district can place additional students to fill out those grades that have the second classroom. Some other considerations, we are projecting relatively stable elementary enrollment, so not a lot of growth or decline either way. And as I noted before, maintaining compliance with the state racial balance laws. We looked at a bunch of different approaches. I'm not going to get into the details of any of these other than scenario one. But whenever we undertake a redistricting process, we always want to make sure that we are looking at a bunch of different options and weighing the pros and the cons of each. So each of these scenarios that we looked at kind of took a different approach to redistricting, everything from traditional redistricting to satellite zones to grading configurations to moving the new program. And ultimately, scenario one was selected as best meeting that overall objective. So just to give an overview of scenario one, this was an approach that largely maintained that neighborhood-based approach that you guys have implemented for quite some time. with some small changes around the edges in order to better use all of the elementary facilities. So what we did was we enlarged the chapel attendance zone, shrank the Johnson House attendance zone, and then made some changes to other attendance zones in order to allow those shifts to occur. Obviously, we can't just move students from Johnson House to chapel because they don't touch each other, so we had to move some of the other lines in the other districts as well.
Before you go on, the small, to the right of, to the left of Franklin, the little green zone there?
Yes.
Yeah. What, can you elaborate on that?
So
a
this
little
is an
bit?
existing satellite zone that's been in place that sends students to chapel. So this has been in place for at least a few years since you did
I've
the
been
last
here since
year.
2010 and it's been in place since then.
Yeah,
They what, I'm sorry?
so it's been in place since at least 2010, it sounds.
Okay, and is that, I mean, why are we maintaining that?
A couple of reasons. The main one being that Franklin is a well-used school, and there's not enough seats at Franklin for that satellite zone to all move to Franklin and be able to be accommodated in that 2 sections per grade school. And historically, I believe this was also used for racial balance for the chapel school as well.
So it wouldn't make sense to move that into Franklin and maybe cut out that little square and push that up to Nichols, or it just doesn't make sense? Is there a numerical reason, or is it just because it was?
It was a trade-off between redistricting impact. So if you were to move that into Franklin, you would have to move an equal area from Franklin to Nichols, and then Nichols would have too many students, then you have to move an equal area from Nichols to another school. So that was the trade-off that we balanced throughout this process. It is kind of the trade-off between moving the fewest students and having neighborhood schools. And the other challenge is that some of your neighborhood schools are quite small, and they're too small for the neighborhood population of Howard. Ideally, we want them to all attend that school, but Franklin in particular, 1 year smaller elementary schools.
I do want to make a comment. That little portion is really problematic because, first of all, that's a 35-minute bus ride for our students, because I've actually ridden the bus. And then I have issues where parents over there, if their kid missed the bus, it's a hardship for them to, to take their kids to school. It's a hardship, and parents ask me, well, gee, can I go to this school that's closer? That's not my decision, but that's a hardship. So I know I'm hearing that, you have the trade-offs, but on the ground, it's difficult for families, because they live so far away. These same families don't attend anything that we have at the school, very few, because they're really out of the neighborhood.
FYI, Carl is the
I'm the principal there, just so you know. And then the long bus ride is a problem too. So it's just, there's a lot of cons with having that small section go all the way across town to Chapel, which is honestly is a hardship for some families.
The other element of scenario 1 is we tried to create a clearer zone in order to fill out those seats at Lordship in a flexible way, but also a predictable way. Today, students who attend Lordship, I think less than half of them actually live in the Lordship attendance zone, and then the remainder live throughout the district. A lot of those students live in the Johnson House attendance zone. We wanted to, and it's just not as predictable. If you're a family that moves in, you may just get assigned to Lordship regardless of where you live in Stratford. So we wanted to have a little bit better defined geography for Lordship. And so what we've created is what we call a flex zone along that eastern edge of the Johnson House attendance zone along the Main Street corridor, which is the area where the district has some flexibility to administratively place students into Lordship if space is available there. Yes?
Can you explain how that would work? Like, you're saying it's a flex zone, so if 2 students are going into kindergarten, how do you distinguish if they're on the same street, who's going to Lordship School and who's going to Johnson?
So that's something the district's going to have to talk through as part of the implementation, whether it's a lottery, whether it's things like sibling preference is going to come into that as well. So that's certainly going to be something to look at for implementation. Largely, it could be something that is, to your point, kindergarten and new registrations. could be something that you can use to fill out those 105 seats. But there will be some redundancy in transportation just because we can't move that whole area to Lordship because we don't have classrooms for all those kids. So we're gonna have to be targeted in specific grades that have the extra classroom.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah,
Sorry.
sure.
That, Franklin, portion to the left that goes to Chapel right now, that satellite, have you put any thought making that the flex zone, like sending those children, because that's closer to where they live currently? Lordship is closer than Chapel?
So we focused more on Johnson House for two reasons. One, Johnson House has the greatest enrollment pressures, so it allows us to fill out Lordship and also try to alleviate some of those enrollment pressures at Johnson House. So that we didn't take that same approach for the Franklin one. So this just illustrates some of the areas that have changed. We've highlighted these. These are the areas that would be reassigned under scenario 1. And these are just some of the high-level numbers. And I know some of the administrators will show updated numbers based on this year's enrollment. That's a little more fine-tuned for special programs a little later. But overall, this would impact about 400 K-5 students, knowing that 6th graders will be rising to the middle school, so they won't be affected. Just over half of those live in these areas that are highlighted on this map, and just under half are out-of-area placements that can be returned to their zone school. So that was another one of the objectives of our process is, because your attendance zones aren't right-sized for your buildings today, particularly in Johnson House, students who live in that neighborhood are sent to many other schools. This will allow more of those students to return to their neighborhood. And that's a significant number of the students that would be impacted under this scenario, assuming they all return to their own school. And as I noted, we are targeting just over 100 students in this flex zone to attend Lordship. And the primary objective, again, was to balance utilization between our buildings. Utilization compares enrollment to the capacity of the buildings, and ideally you want all the schools to be at about the district-wide average, and scenario 1 was the best of all of the options that we looked at in terms of balancing utilization across the buildings, ranging from a low of about 82% at Johnson House to a high of 93% at Franklin and Chapel, with that staying about the same over the last 5 years as well. So the changes to the elementary attendance zones will then result in changes to the middle school attendance zones. We kept the same feeder pattern as today, so the same elementary schools that feed into flood will continue to feed into flood. It'll just be the new attendance zones, and similarly for Worcester as well. We did look at options that would make the middle and high schools more of a 50-50 balance, but unfortunately that doesn't work from an elementary standpoint. So this was able to improve enrollment balance between the new middle schools, but Worcester would remain the larger of the two, with about 53% of the middle school students and 47% at flood. But that gap is less than it would be today. And similarly at the high school, right now, Stratford High School is the larger of the two high schools, and we have a decent number of out-of-area placements who have been shifted into Bunnell for enrollment balance purposes. So again, we were trying to get more of that 50-50 balance if we could, but ended up with an improvement over today, similar to the middle schools, about 43% in the Stratford High attendance zone and 47% Bunnell attendance zone. So this will lead to a reduction in administrative placements, hopefully. So scenario 1, we did scorecards for all of these, and again, there's pros and cons to each. This one performed the best in terms of enrollment balance of all the scenarios that we looked at. It also maintained a neighborhood-based model to a larger extent than some of the other options we looked at. And then this also, along with our satellite zone option, redistricted the fewest number of students. So that ended up being an important consideration as well. And then from a transportation standpoint, we did have the district's transportation provider look at this, and this was the most efficient of the options that we looked at from a transportation standpoint, because we were trying to maintain that neighborhood model to the extent possible. Happy to answer any of the questions.
So just and I'll just say, just to start it before you go on, coming into this, my opinion is that we should grandfather at least the last 2 grades of high school, look at these numbers, maybe the entire high school, and maybe tweaking that little line there. Those are kind of where I'm at. I'll let you guys, I'm gonna open up, but I just wanna say that that's kind of where I'm starting at this process, but I want this to be like an open discussion and everybody kind of voice their opinion and say what they have to say, but,
Can I just finish his presentation, because I'm jumping on what I gave you. So he's done, and I'm gonna make sure you guys
I just
know
have a
what
question
happened
on
last.
two as well.
Greg, you got it?
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's gonna relate, it's all gonna come together.
I was just wondering if we could get, like a racial balancing for the future, so if we do this, what the racial balancing would be per elementary school, middle school, high school?
So we don't project racial balance, but we did do a look back for all of these to see how they would perform. We do note that it's almost impossible for any of your schools to be non-compliant with the state law, just given the high percentage of students of color in the district. But we still were cognizant to try to make it as balanced as we
While we're sitting on the balancing, just so we know, as of today, our enrollment report for our student of colors is 73% overall for elementary. We had 25 points on that, that brings us to 98. We're out of balance. As of today, and that's with the streets for Franklin going to Chapel. If we bring those streets back, we're gonna be in trouble, because as of today, Franklin is 91% student of color. So we're really impending imbalance there.
And what is Johnson today?
Johnson, I didn't look at that, because, you know what, I think it's like 89, but Franklin is my one concern, because that neighborhood, as Carla said, it's for parents, those parents are using public transportation, a lot of them don't have cars, things like that, it's an inconvenience for them, but unfortunately, the demographics in that area is what the demographics are, and we have a fight against the state. So it depends on how low we wanna be. We wanna fight against the state, and then we're gonna pull kids apart to fix the imbalance, or we keep it the way it is.
I think, there's a lot of different pieces that this committee needs to think about over the next 6 months. And a lot of it is how you want to approach the implementation of scenario 1. You know, absolutely, can we look at what it would be like to shift that satellite zone? That satellite zone currently is going to Chapel, right? So that satellite zone isn't impacted because they're already going there, they're gonna continue to go there. Now, if you were to look at shifting that, it would get complicated with who's shifting where. Could you guys explore that? Possibly. While you're doing that though, you need to think about how we're going to be implementing this. And your bigger questions on the spreadsheet that I gave you, thanks to Susan who ran it for me, tells you exactly how many kids in each grade at each school will be impacted under scenario 1, okay? So when you're looking this is the students that will be leaving that school, okay? So you can see Chapel's total, they'll only be losing 19 students under this scenario. I went a step further, just for everyone to know and understand. I did a plus or minus, how many students you're getting versus how many are leaving. So at Stratford High School, they would end up plus 18. Benell would be plus 24. Worcester Middle School would be plus 20. Flood Middle School would be down 16 kids. This is for the start of next year. Okay, Franklin, 0. 29 come in, 29 go out. Johnson House would be down 87 kids. That's significantly impactful for Johnson and something they drastically need. Whitney would be down 39 kids. Nichols, I wish would have shown a decline. They would be plus 2. And we know that school is a little bit crowded as well. Still within the capacity, but they're definitely one of the ones that didn't get as much relief. Chapel would go up 94 kids. Lordship would go up 29 kids. Wilcoxon would go down 25 students. And Second Helene would go down 76 students. Okay, Second Helene and Johnson are very much at capacity right now. Those schools do need student relief, and this would give them that. Also, as you're thinking about the planning, we did not move any programs. Okay, so ABA is currently at Franklin, Lordship, and Second Helene. That's where ABA is staying. STEPS, the dual language program. All of your programs were not part of the moves in this scenario. All right, so some of the things you need to think about is, you know, do we want to grandfather in anybody? Do we want to say you know, this scenario is gonna get rolled out all at once and everybody's moving? Are we gonna say if you're in high school and you've already established, you know, you're in 11th or 12th or 10th grade, we're gonna let you stay and ride it out? Are we gonna talk about transition years? Are you gonna think about the kids that are heading into 6th grade, their final year of an elementary school? Now you'll have those impacts. You'll be able to look and go, okay, if we choose to do this, then what we originally learned in scenario 1 that was gonna be a no cost, no additional cost for buses for us, could become a cost for buses. Because you have to think about how and why you do it. And if you went with something that said, well, if parents want their kids to stay and can provide their own transportation, that becomes an equity issue. So I do think as you're thinking about those things, it either needs to be, we're going to make these exceptions because we as a group feel it's what's right for our community, or we're not. But it shouldn't be, we're gonna make exceptions only for families with the means to take us up on those exceptions. Does that make sense? So it's a big job for all of you right now to kind of dig into this and to start to float some ideas out there about whether or not you think, you know, we should be making any amends, or whether we just say we chose scenario 1 and we're moving with scenario 1. And that's why I thought it was important for you to see at the high school level is a perfect example. It's almost a wash, right? So if you really want to move, you know, 8 plus 18 and plus 24. Do you want to just leave them because it's not that impactful, or you want to actually move them? So, you know, it's just some significant discussions. Do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, just, I want to add on to that with the high school because, you know, kids are already in sports and on teams and in bands, and all of a sudden you're going to rip them from the team or the band or whatever that they're been playing with to send them back for 1 or 2 years to another school. I think the high school is probably the toughest one to do. My own opinion, I would say 8th graders start going in 9th, but you leave the high school kids alone right now.
Once you've figured out what you're gonna either allow or not allow, what waivers you're gonna make, that is one job. Your next job is to figure out that flex zone, how determinations are gonna be made. The easy way out is to say the superintendent and registration will place anyone within that zone to properly balance the enrollment at schools. You leave that then all to us. Or you say, we wanna set up a lottery system. 100 kids need to go from that zone, give or take, you know, 10 or 20 to Lordship. So, you know, you have to create how you want that to happen.
I was just gonna say, it could be discriminatory though, if we just willy-nilly have the administration say, we need a balance, now it's your turn, so you go here, now it's your turn, you go there. They could say, for whatever reason, they're being discriminated. So I think it would have to be a lottery system to create equity and.
Yes and no. So your administrators are hired to make sure we are doing what's best for Stratford. And we are always looking at the racial balance as well as the enrollment balance. So when you have a person looking at it, we're not gonna go send somebody to make that enrollment 32 kids in 6th grade when I could have had the student in a class that would have only brought the numbers up to 25. The ultimate goal for all of your administrators down here is so that we have equal enrollment in our classes. We want to stop having 15 kids in one class and 32 in the other. So that is the largest point of this redistricting. So I don't foresee you ever having any administration down here that's not going to just make a decision based on your class enrollment and your racial balance.
So the floor is open. Good.
Just in looking at the middle school 53-47 split, right now it's currently 54-46, and that equals 55 more students at Worcester. And it's year after year, it's that 55, and that's gonna continue with this plan, which then, pushes up to the high school. Just in thinking about I believe it's called the flex zone, the one that's right next, not the little one that goes to Chapel, the one that's next to Johnson. Would it be possible for some of those kids to have that be a flood pathway, so that that middle school balance kind of comes into more of a reality? I mean, 55 between two schools it's a direct comparison. My language arts teachers can say, hey, how many kids are in your class? And it's 20 something, and mine might be 19, and those aren't comparisons that we want to make all the time, but those are real conversations that people have. Yep. So perhaps that flex zone could be shifted up to flood in some way, and it just changes that pathway.
Yeah, so we did kind of reverse engineer our process, starting with the middle schools and high schools first, right? We said, okay, let's create 50-50 middle and high schools and then see how it can work with the elementary schools. And that was the challenge we ran into, is that once you get to the elementary level, it just doesn't work. So to your point, policy is kind of your tool at your disposal. You know, should that still be a goal of the district to get that true 50-50? It would have to be a combination of the zones and policy. So, yeah, point well taken.
I think you're just looking at, you're working on this scenario. So those are ideas you want to throw out and things you guys want to work through. You just want to have this all pretty much solid, no later than January, because we need to set up transportation, we need letters to go home, families need time to process. So whatever rules or parameters you want to put on, the idea of having this year was so that we can make sure our families are really comfortable and understand what's going on. So you have a few months to be able to make those decisions, but they're big decisions.
I think some of them,
Well, that would continue the high school. If you take 55 kids a year, that's a 200 kid difference in, you know, over 4 years in the high schools. So, you know, evening it out, may possibly do that. Flex zone could go a little ways to evening out, you know, the high schools as well.
But Greg, when you say even it out, you were talking about
Numbers.
sending, I know the
Yeah.
numbers, but that evening out includes taking kids from that flex zone and shipping them to Chapel. Because, well, I guess we're one of the feeder schools.
No, it would
I
be,
guess.
the flex zone,
Yeah.
the middle school would be their, flood would be their pathway instead of Worcester.
They would go to
Okay,
Lordship,
They would go to Lordship, but
but
then, yeah,
like we used to do, they would
change
choose,
the whole pathway.
the street would be,
Right.
that
Kind of like
may,
the little zones, like Franklin,
That's
yeah,
exactly.
same idea, yeah.
that just may impact busing. So just remember,
Yeah.
like when you do when you make those kind of decisions, those are the things we'll have to come back and
Right.
calculate the impact on buses.
Mr. Llewellyn, Mr. Llewellyn?
Didn't one of the scenarios get us closer, like to 52-48 or 51-49? But I believe the transportation impacts were like the most severe in that scenario. So I think, Greg, we've kind of modeled trying to kind of balance the secondary schools out, and it presents some other, you know, peripheral challenges with things. I didn't know if you had access to the other scenarios or if just all of this is focused in on scenario one.
Just scenario one today, but you're right. The different scenarios performed better in different metrics that we looked at. So this one may not have been the best from a high school and middle school balance. I don't think anything got us to 50-50 that we presented. One may have been a percentage or two better, but
Yeah,
marginally.
I want to say, I think the closest one was 52-48.
Yeah, and I believe the redistricting impacts were greater and had some other
Yes.
trade-offs as well that were taken.
Just one of the reasons I think we liked number one, the majority of us at least, was the busing costs were lower, the less kids impacted, and the moves, for the most part, were all contiguous to their existing district. So we weren't, you know, we had stopped shipping a lot of those kids. One of them had all these kids being bused up to Chapel, and I didn't think it was fair. I don't think it's fair that the Franklin kids gotta go all the way up to Chapel either. And maybe we can, that's something I'd like to look at if anyway we could. But it was so the least impact, so that they were moving up a district, not, you know, not up to the next district. So those were the big reasons, the least kids, least expense as far as busing and a contiguous move into an abutting district.
If what this group decides doesn't impact the cost of transportation greatly, and we are able to save, one of the things that had been brought up was possibly starting to provide more transportation. So instead of making elementary kids that are 1.5 miles away, maybe you could shrink it to 1 mile, because you would have bus money to play with, because this is actually potentially gonna save us bus money. So it's, you know, you gotta think about all those things too and weigh it in and say, what are other goals? You know, and we have a policy that has elementary, anybody over 1.5 miles has to, and high schools too. So, you know, those are things to think about. If there's a way for us to do this without making a whole bunch of accommodations, costing us more money in transportation, those transportation savings may be used to benefit other things our students and families need.
And that's something I think we looked at prior to this study, was I think Stratford High had done a study, and it showed during bad weather days, the absenteeism rate jumped through the roof. And, you know, which would lead you to believe that, you know, kids gotta walk 1.5 miles or 2 miles on a rainy day and come to school. So how do we help address that issue? And that's one thing we wanted to look at as well. So for that,
Have we looked at dividing that one little pocket that in the Franklin area that's getting shipped all the way up to, Chapel, divided into 3, 4 different sections and send the kids a little bit more locally. I'm listening to what the principal's saying is that the kids are not being able to participate after school. And I believe, at a long time, when my kids all went through the system, that is what really builds character.
Yeah, I believe we did look at some options that sent them to schools that were closer. I think we had one that maybe shifted that neighborhood to Johnson House.
I mean, just one, split it up.
The challenge becomes peer group size when you're dealing with small areas like that without creating kind of new satellites. So when we move areas, we try to at least make them large enough so that when the students move, they're in class with a couple of familiar faces. With an area like that, that's pretty small.
It's also going to be a huge busing impact.
Yeah.
If you're having 4 different, if the kids are going to 3 different schools, and those kids are all more than 1.5 miles away from those schools, that's 3 different buses coming into a tiny little area to bus kids out, so.
And again, that may be an area where policy may be something you look at, versus changing the geography. It's, if there's space in a school that's closer, perhaps that could be an administrative policy that you could look into for that neighborhood. Otherwise, Chapel would be suitable.
I'm thinking, what about Eli Whitney? Because if you were looking at racial, Eli Whitney was the school with really the lowest, racial percentages, as far as I know. So, why couldn't some of those kids go to Eli Whitney? And it's closer.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be a decision for this committee, right? I think our rationale was, we were filling all the schools efficiently. So Eli Whitney is a school that I think does have a little bit of room, so that would be an analysis I think you'd have to run to say if that area moved, would Eli Whitney have space, would it not? So
What we can do is make sure this committee gets the exact number of students in that area. Susan Hughes can run that for you, so you can know the exact number of students you're talking about right now, and that may help you as you think about your decisions.
Is there a reason why that part of Franklin is sent to Chapel? Does anybody know?
I think
Racial
it's
balance.
for
It's a racial
balance.
balance. Like if you shift all of Franklin over and like have that part absorbed by Franklin, but then a different part of Franklin, like closer to Wilcox, and would that help at all?
So again, it comes down to the trade-offs, right? So it's possible, but you'd have to move, it wouldn't just be one movement, right? You have to move that area into Franklin, you have to move an area out of Franklin to another school, that school might not have room, you have to move again and again. So that was one of the main trade-offs we were playing is student impact. So to move a small area sometimes means you have to move a lot more students simply because the school space isn't right next door, especially, yes, exactly. So Franklin and Johnson House in particular, because of the density, the number of students, and the capacity is essentially at Chapel and Marchett, which are the 2 schools that are furthest away from that area, unfortunately. So.
Heather, would you be able to get us a copy of like these projections of who's moving and how many and what their racial balancing implications will be?
Sure.
So, okay, thank you.
You want the school as the racial balance will be next year after the kids vote.
Well, yeah, because he said he doesn't do a projection on that. However, we know what's actually here right now.
I wanted to
what's
make sure I knew what you were
moving.
asking
Okay,
for, so I
yep,
tell you the
thank
right
you.
thing. Yeah, Susan can do that for you.
Thank you.
I kept all that data.
Thank you.
Say something, Greg? In relationship to your lordship zone, flex zone going to flood, how about historically thinking about what's happened in the past year? Wilcoxon not always went to Worcester.
No,
At
not
one point
always.
in time, Wilcoxon went to flood
Mhm.
and Benell.
Yeah.
So maybe you guys think, go back that way. I'm just thinking that's already happened historically in the past. They keep switching it back. Right.
We've also
Switch it back
split
in.
in the past. We've also had,
2009.
a school that had some kids go to Flood and some kids, I think it was Johnson, some kids used to go to Flood, some used to go to Worcester. So there's lots of things you can do to think about, possibly working within that zone or within our schools to balance our high schools a little bit better. But with the projections that Pat showed, we're not gonna be over capacity at either high school.
Yeah, the high school enrollment is projected to decrease because you have
It
some
is.
smaller classes in the elementary schools now, and as they move up, relieve some of the pressures that you faced over the last couple of years.
So are there any other questions, comments, thoughts?
I can get you anything else you may want. You want any, breakdowns of specific grades, or you need to look at something a little closer, you wanna think about transition grades, you can send those requests to us, and we will send the data through your chair to all of you.
Just for the sake of kind of lessening the workload, so to speak, do you wanna come to consensus right now that we're gonna leave the high schools untouched? I mean, since it's virtually like a very small net number in terms of the impact.
So this would start next year, so if we were to leave the high schools untouched, would we say anybody who is currently in high school will remain that, and anybody moving into high school
Yeah, it
would
be
move to the new high school?
Yeah, it would be this year's 8th graders, current 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th graders, their pathways wouldn't change.
So if we,
You said 8, 9, 10, 11?
Because they'll be freshmen next year when the redistricting gets implemented.
I'll play
Why
devil's
don't they
advocate,
start
they're already
now?
moving, right? So you're moving from middle school to high school, so why not move them to their correct pathway?
but the ones, so then the other question would be, if that was the case, I guess the impact, can we look at, if we left all those currently in high school on their path, leave them untouched, that it took, to my original opinion, that only has one more grade, and there's not a real, but are we impacting a sibling or a family by sending one kid to, and I know our family, our kids went to separate high schools, and for them it was great, but not as good, and they both walked, and we just like, get out of here.
You
But
could be, you could be.
Can we look at that, just
Yeah.
if there are any
Eighth grade
sibling?
siblings of current high school students. You could, and the other thing this committee could think about is that's the kind of policies you can start to look at and write. You can we have policy in place currently about 10th through 11th graders. If a parent moves from one side of the town to the other side of the town, the child is allowed to stay at their current high school until they graduate. Okay? We have policies already that are similar to that, so you could look at those things and make recommendations to the policy committee that a sibling rule be put in.
Would that be a board policy or an administrative policy?
That's a board policy
Okay.
currently.
Okay, we have a couple of members on policy now, but, so yeah, maybe for the next meeting, if we could just get this, before we jump on that, I looking at these numbers, I was kind of just of, 10th and 11th graders moving up to 11 and 12, we would just leave those. But the numbers aren't that impactful, so I'm almost now of the mind those three will remain on that. Obviously, the seniors will graduate, but those coming up, and anybody new moving up to the school would go onto their path, but then, we have to look at their transportation track and whether they'd be capable of handling that, but, before I would want to just say, let's leave it, I don't want to split up families.
So then the other thing I would like
That's
to
gonna be
do
hard
is,
to do.
No, I know, everything's gonna be hard to know.
But sooner or later, you have to make that decision.
Yep.
You play basketball or football or whatever with Stratford.
Yeah.
Your brother did, so you put in the other high school.
Yeah. Well, where they played or where they're going, I just want to see.
So
Yeah.
if they worry about the sports or music or anything else,
Mhm.
you gotta go.
Yep.
And you're making a decision while you're in 8th grade.
Yeah.
So when you're in 8th grade, a year from now, you're gonna know what high school you're going to.
that's what I was kind of getting at.
And that's what's gonna make, that's where you're gonna go to school.
Mhm. Yeah.
So you don't have any more allegiance, if your brother was there, or your sister was there, it's their allegiance, now this is your allegiance.
Mhm.
You gotta do that. Because you can't keep pushing along, push this way, this kid, that kid, you open up Pandora's box.
Mhm.
Oh, my kid, okay, let him go, oh, no. And the next door neighbor, well, how come he can go and my kid can't go, because this kid, think more trouble than it's worth.
I agree. And the reason, again, why we wanted to add new members, I mean, we know what we know, but we don't know the inner workings in the daily. I mean, you see the impact of that small ranking school district, which we don't know. There are things we don't know. There are certain with these implementations, what their impact, that we can say, yeah, you You can ask the carpenter, you know, can you run a wire over there?
Oh, the carpenter better not run.
Exactly, but so we don't wanna be the carpenters running the wires. We want you guys to, you know, in essence, run the wires and give us some guidance where to drill the holes or whatever it might be, but we don't wanna do something that has a negative impact on the school environment that if we had asked your guidance, we could have avoided. So I think your, you know, staff members' participation in this is critical and can give us some really good insight into how we can make this, in the end, it sucks, you know?
And Mike, you get them, it's all about the kids.
Yeah.
The kids going to school, this kid all of a sudden, does that going, you know,
Yeah.
and the kid from this school, from new school, where they know how they gonna relate to them, how to hang out together, whatever you wanna call it, but it's crazy.
Yeah, it's tough, and being a two high school town, you know, makes it tough. My kids played soccer and they played all together, and then they went to school and all the teams split up, and, yeah, but they were all still friends, and I think kids are more flexible than parents a lot of times, but it is, how do we do it, at least, once it's done, it's done. And people are gonna complain, same with the budget, once the budget's passed, it's done, nobody complains anymore. This is what we got, this is how we're gonna deal with it. I think some of the parents have already started requesting going to the new school that they might be going to next year. So some people, whatever we do, we're not gonna make everybody happy, but it's to try and do it as correctly as possible.
It's
There's
just like,
no,
kids going to high school, whichever one they're chosen to go, when they get out of there, they're gonna go to college, they're gonna go all different places.
Yeah.
So it's all good, but at least when they're in the grades where they battle, you gotta keep them something.
so
I just have one last comment, I'll just say my piece and be quiet, I guess.
No, please don't.
In terms of the satellite, I really, my heart does go out to the families there because I hear the challenges they have. You know, we talk about in this district, you know, less, you know, the attendance, we want kids to go to school, but when we set it up where it's impossible for them to attend school because if they miss the bus and there's no way to get their child to school, that's just a whole other issue. And it got to the point where, you know, we really never saw the families participate in our academic nights. I switched from academic nights to just having academic days, so that those kids can also participate in the activities, although we are gonna have a STEM night this year. But again, they're not a part, or the families are not always a part of the school community. That's part of the issue. And then attendance is an issue. And then we often, you know, when we have attendance issues, we'll go and do a home visit, and it's always going to the home visit to my families in that satellite area. So I just think we're doing them a disservice. And yes, maybe they started this from 2010. I don't know what the end of this was. But, well, it could have been racial balancing. But again, I know that Chapel's ratio, my numbers are higher, way higher than, say, Eli Whitney. I used to be principal at Eli Whitney, and we've always had the lowest numbers there. So I'm not sure why it is that we have to, you know, ship them all the way to Chapel. The other thing too, I had a family, there was a 4-year-old who was starting, I guess when she started kindergarten, and mom wanted to know, well, I really don't want to put my 4-year-old on this bus because how long is the bus ride? I said, well, bus ride is 35 minutes, and I know this because I rode the bus. And it's one of our most challenging buses. So she instead is going to try to drive her kid now, which is a hardship for her, all the way to Chapel. So I just wish we would consider this. I just feel like, well, you know, this is what we came up with, but unfortunately, you know, we have to have the satellite, but then that means we have a cluster of families who are at a disadvantage, and that's unfortunate. So that's that. And the other part is when we do this transition, my hope is that we don't drip, but it just happens in one fell swoop. Okay, we're gonna redistrict, let's redistrict. And do it all at one time, you know, rather than this drip. So, that's my piece, guys.
and I agree with you 100% on both parts, but that was from day one, that was my
Right.
issue with scenario one, was that, and I just figured once we got to that, we could do something, but we're not, you know, again, it's not, good enough isn't, you know, it needs to be right, and I think if there's any way we can make, and take that, because those kids are, you know, some of the neediest kids maybe, and
They are.
it is a hardship for them, so.
And if a parent requests a waiver, it's not gonna happen. Okay, so it's unfortunate.
Yeah, and that's just my opinion, so. And just so you guys know, I don't have a dog in this fight, so, when it comes down to it, whatever the vote is, and that's what we'll push forward to the board. But I don't, outside the scenario, you know, the only things I'd like to see is grandfathering only at a certain point in high school and above, and doing something with that one little district for those kids. Outside of that, whatever you guys decide is, it's gonna be majority vote, and that's the direction we're gonna move. We'll obviously have to send it to the board will have to, you know, maybe we'll call some of you guys up to the board meeting when it comes to vote, so you can explain some of the thoughts that went into it. But, you know, you guys see the impact every day, you know what goes on. You know, and some of you other guys, you know, Rich, you've had family through Perez, you have different insights, and so we wanna make sure that everybody has a voice and speaks and shares. Is there any information you want, like, so we typically meet the first Thursday of every month. Our meetings are at 6:30, I think. We've kinda gotten off that schedule just because of summer, but I wanna at least stick to the first Thursday of every month. And I'm not opposed to meeting twice a month, you know, if we get really deep in the weeds. It might be one of these discussions, no, let's do this and that, and we're done. And it might be one of these long-winded discussions that's gonna take, and I'm good either way, but it might be a long-winded discussion that's gonna take a whole lot of meetings to resolve it and iron it out. And I think in the end, it'll be worth it, but, you know, you guys will kind of lead that path, so. But if there's any information you want, any questions, you were all on, I think, the meeting schedule update, so you can send, it's FOIable, so if you send requests for information, just send it over to Heather, and she'll get it to us in an appropriate manner. Don't respond to all, because that's an FOI violation, it creates a meeting. But if you have questions, if you want information, if you wanna ask it now, if you guys as staff members wanna create some kind of a subgroup and create your own chat room, however you wanna do it, that you guys start bouncing your ideas, that you come back to us with it. You know, cause we're gonna be looking for some directive from you. Mine's pretty simple. I told you my two issues, but there might be a lot of little inner pieces, so, however you guys wanna do it, but I want you to be effective, I want you to be vocal, and I want you to speak out, so we can make the right decision. Without your help, I don't think we're gonna make the right decision. We'll be close.
I would like data about siblings of sixth graders going.
I think I'm hearing we want sibling data in general. You want sibling data to know about eighth graders that currently have siblings at the high school, and you would like to know sibling data for sixth graders that currently have seventh graders in one of the two middle schools.
Also within my elementary school, so I'm looking at my numbers of current fifth graders who possibly would be going to chapel next year. There's multiple children in that family. I know we might be considering, like, would we let sixth graders stay and finish out elementary
But then you're
in their
impacting.
base, but then they have 2 or 3 younger siblings, are we letting all of them stay?
Gotcha.
Those are.
And your pathway would change, because Wilcoxon would be going from Worcester to Flood, with this scenario, yeah.
Well, some
Oh, well, some of
no,
them, yeah, some of them, I should say.
Not the
The
whole
ones that are
school, the ones that
redistricted,
are
yeah,
moving to chapel, it will change
yeah.
their pathway.
So that would be important. the
They may
sibling,
have
yeah,
older siblings.
Yeah.
As well.
We will do we'll get you sibling data.
What's the current population of each middle school?
I just looked a minute ago, 535 at Worcester, 479 at Flood.
Thanks.
Well, and I do want to add, I am in favor of keeping the high school students grandfathered in, just because some of the work we do with portions of graduates, as far as building the relationships with that primary point person, identifying the staff member that you can trust, so that they don't have to restart that process. Even with the school counselors, you know, students have those relationships, especially like if they have a IEP with their case manager as well. I think those family partnerships are crucial and important that we keep them as well.
Mike, do the new people have the SNAP reports that we kind of worked on during the process?
Well, that's kind of what was up there, but
So specifically, I remember when we kind of got to the decision point, there was one sort of slide that had these 6 or 7 criteria, and it had all 6 of the scenarios, and you could see how the middle school, high school percentages changed, and then like in transportation impact, some of the scenarios had pink, meaning not a positive outcome. So a lot of our decision making went into kind of getting as much kind of green and yellow as we could, and literally you can see that in this one slide.
That's up on the website still.
It is? Okay.
Yeah. That's right.
And can you maybe, cause you know my,
Love of the website.
passion of the website, can you maybe just send a link to the group?
Yeah.
I'm probably the most computer illiterate guy here, so everybody I don't know what he's talking about, but I can't find anything. I couldn't even find the invisible X at the top of a thing to plug it off. I had to call Heather and complain to her. She's like, it's right at the top, it's just invisible. I'm like, so, but anyway, there is, and so again, keeping in mind, if you're looking at these other scenarios, we're going with scenario one, but it just gives you some insight into.
But it'll show some of the sliding scales and kind of where some of our thought process and where some of our logic was.
Any other questions, thoughts? Looks like some of you were thinking pretty deeply. So if, obviously if during the night you come up with questions, send it in an email format, but just send it through either Teresa or directly to me, and they'll make sure that any questions or answers get sent to us in an appropriate manner. But please, think about this hard and deeply, ask all the questions, and help us come to it's something that has to happen, in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to do it, but it has to happen for classroom size equity, for educational equity, it needs to happen. And some parents will feel a pinch, and some will be grateful, and some won't care, but we need to do it for our kids. So please help us. And if anybody, last chance today, questions, comments, concerns?
That's a question.
Of
So
course.
is everyone gonna come to the next meeting prepared with recommendations and suggestions to be discussed? That way you guys stay on track. I just wanna make sure that we try to hit our timeline so that we can make sure we have appropriate.
Yeah.
We got all the information that people had asked for.
Yeah, so questions, answers, but yeah, I would like everybody to come prepared to move this along. If questions bring up more questions, then we'll continue on, but if we don't have questions, then we're gonna kind of move ahead with where we're at. If nobody has any questions, concerns, comments, that's it, we're doing it, and we're done. We can, come in, take a quick vote and walk away, but if there's ways you see to implement or changes, but, the timeline this takes comes from the conversations that are created through this meeting. And if there are no questions, if there's no comments, then, we're gonna move forward. And if not, it'll evolve around those questions and comments and concerns.
My goal for my team is that anytime you request something, we'll have it back to you within 48 hours. Okay, so the 2 requests I have now for siblings and for the link, you guys will have that in 48 hours. You send me any new requests, from the date you send it to me, we will try to have it out for your chair to everybody within 48 hours.
So I'd say,
There was a racial balance request also.
at the next meeting, come prepared to vote, or come prepared with questions or suggestions.
Before we go too far, we're talking, I think there's a lot of time to talk this out, because, it's gotta go out to this whole community.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have forever to do this, we have to move in a timely fashion. We've been tasked with a job, and we need to do it. And unless we're making changes or adjustments in a productive manner, then we need to move forward. But I don't wanna short-tail it or race through this, but we also have a deadline. But it needs to be moved in a productive manner, whether it's to adjust it or to move it forward. Mr. Fidel?
I know the question's been asked 3 different times in different formats. Who do we ask, or who is gonna be in charge of trying to divide up that little pocket around Franklin that goes to Chapel, to other different schools? Are we asking Heather, or are we asking this gentleman?
Well, I'll ask you both then, if you can come up with any possible scenarios that would help remediate that issue.
Yep, and I will get you the number of students currently in that area.
If it's possible, I'll pass you guys with that, you would brain fund the operation, so.
I see that as one of the biggest problems right now.
Yeah, I'm guessing it's a concern for a number of us, so it might be, and if the answer is there's nothing we can do, then we're gonna have to look at, I think, because I don't think a few families should be more harshly impacted than others, in my opinion, only. And these guys might say, no, screw it, this way we're going. But I think we should definitely, that's something that I think some people in this room feel very passionate about. I think it's something that we should, if there's any possible way to do it, that we look at a way. And if it costs us a few extra dollars and we save over here, then, maybe we gotta, whatever, cut a few more administrators next year. Whatever it is. I think we need to, I think everybody in this room is passionate enough about it that should be at least something we.
It's because I'm not done with the kick over.
All right, last chance. So our next meeting will be the first Thursday, 6:30. I'll take a motion to adjourn. By Brian, Mr. O'Brien, second by Mr. Chad. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favor? Opposed? Thanks for everybody coming. We really appreciate you helping us out here. And you were done.